Hello and welcome on board. This is Eye on Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné in the headlines. President Macky Sall says April 2nd will be the end of his mandate as president of Senegal. But first, a national dialogue is needed before setting up a new presidential election date. Rwanda and the EU strike a deal on raw materials. The DRC says it's not theirs to give in the first place and accuses Rwanda of stealing its mineral wealth. Many unwanted European old cars end up in West Africa to be sold, a bargain that can cost the environment and people's lives. President Macky Sall gave this Thursday his first big interview since he postponed the presidential elections on February 3rd, a decision that plunged Senegal into its worst political crisis in decades and sparked unrest which left 4 people dead. On national TV, he said April 2nd will be the end of his mandate as president. Let's listen to President Macky Sall.
I'm sticking to that, and I'm saying it very clearly and very solemnly. On the 2nd of April 2024, my mission ends as the head of Senegal. The rest we'll see how. As far as the date is concerned, we'll see what the dialogue comes up with.
But we'll still have to wait for a new election date. Our correspondent Sam Bradpeace was watching this interview from Dakar.
Many people had been expecting the President Macky Sall to reveal the date of the presidential poll, but he didn't. He said this could only be revealed after a national dialogue is held. Now, this national dialogue itself will take place on Monday and Tuesday next week, and it will likely bring together presidential candidates and quite possibly members of civil society as well. If an election isn't held before the official end of Macky Sall's term, which is on April the 2nd, it's unclear at this stage who will replace him. And that's likely something that will be discussed during this national dialogue. The key point, though, as you've already mentioned, is that the president has said solemnly that he will not remain in office after the end of his term on April 2nd.
And as we know, there's been a wave of political prisoners released as well. Any new words? And what about Ousmane Sonko? Did he talk about him?
Yes, so hundreds of political prisoners have been released since last week alone. And during his address on Thursday evening, President Macky Sall said that he was open to granting some kind of amnesty for Ousmane Sonko in a bid to bring peace to the nation of Senegal, which, remember, since 2021 has seen the deadliest clashes in its history. All of this as part of a kind of long-running political saga, which has essentially pitted the President Macky Sall against Ousmane Sonko and against other opposition figures as well.
Now to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where tensions remain high as conflict with M23, a rebel group backed by Rwanda, continues in the east. Kinshasa denounced the European Union signing of a critical raw materials deal with Rwanda, which it accuses of stealing its mineral wealth.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has hit out at the European Union for a recent deal that it signed with Rwanda on raw materials. Relations between Rwanda and Congo are dire in the extreme. Congo accuses its neighbor Rwanda of backing the M23 rebel group in order to plunder its mineral resources. Rwanda, for its part, says that Congo works with militias such as the FDLR, which present a national security threat to Rwanda. On Monday, Brussels inadvertently waded into this dispute by signing a memorandum of understanding on raw materials with Rwanda, which it said produces critical minerals such as tantalum and niobium. The deal provides for ensuring a supply of raw materials for the EU and aims to increase traceability. But the signing provoked outrage in Kinshasa. The Foreign Ministry said that Rwanda doesn't have the critical materials and that it smuggles them from Congolese territory, where they are abundant. It also said the signing of the deal was, and I quote, a very unfriendly act, and it called for an explanation. Congolese government spokesman Patrick Muyaya posted on social media that there is no compassion towards victims of Rwandan aggression. Brussels signed a similar deal with Congo in October, but its Rwanda deal couldn't have come at a worse time. For a start, many Congolese people perceive the EU as indirectly supporting M23 rebels through its relations with Rwanda. But on top of that, the EU-Rwanda deal was signed amid fierce fighting between the M23 and Congolese forces, and it came just as the rebels had encircled the Congolese city of Goma.
And the humanitarian crisis has of course worsened. The United States and France have called on Rwanda to end its support for the M23. The United Nations also appealed for $2.6 billion in funding to respond to the emergency. Our correspondents went to Goma.
There's a constant coming and going. In this church, people who've been internally displaced are arriving every day. Since a new M23 offensive started in early February, more than 135,000 people have fled to the outskirts of Goma. They've arrived in complete...
I'm hoping to get food and tents, because for the moment we're spending the night outdoors. Our children need medical care, because the situation is catastrophic with all this overcrowding.
In a corner of the church, Julie arranges the meager belongings she was able to take with her. She abandoned her home to escape shelling. Now, she and her children are trying to survive.
They gave me some flour and I mixed it with water to give to my child. I lost 2 of my children when I fled. I don't know where they are. There were a lot of people on the road and we got here on foot. All I have left are my 2 babies who were on my back when I came.
The humanitarian situation in North Kivu province is catastrophic. Since the start of the conflict in late 2021, more than 2 million people have fled the fighting.
Fighting has intensified over the past 2 weeks. The reception sites are saturated. Basic needs such as water, hygiene and health measures are lacking.
The packed Bulengo displacement camp outside Goma illustrates this saturation. Thousands of families live in simple tarpaulin shelters. Their position is extremely precarious. They might have to flee again.
We hear detonations every day. There are artillery positions set up right next to us, about 500 meters from the camp.
Angola and Kenya have launched mediation efforts to try and put an end to the conflict, but to no avail. This farmer has lost all hope of seeing peace return to eastern Congo.
If the authorities have the power to end this war, they should do it. If not, they can transfer us to another country where we will be at peace and this region will remain a battlefield.
Congolese authorities and aid workers alike are overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. In North Kivu, families are all asking themselves the same question: when will they be able to return home?
Hundreds of mourners paid an emotional tribute to Kelvin Kiptum ahead of Friday's funeral. Kenya's world marathon record holder was killed on February 11 in a road accident. He was 24 years old. Kiptum made a name for himself on the marathon scene in 2022 and shattered the world record in Chicago in October last year. He ran the distance in 2 hours and 35 seconds, slashing 34 seconds off the previous fastest time set up by his Kenyan rival, the marathon legend Eliud Kipchoge. Many old cars that Europeans no longer want are increasingly being sent to Africa. Some are in very poor conditions and very polluting, but this is often the only option for buyers in West Africa as there are no car factories. But some of those second-hand vehicles end up being a real danger.
At the port of Lomé in Togo, thousands of cars are waiting for a second life. They came from Europe, but also North America and Japan. But they've become too old, too polluting, so they're shipped to Africa. Here, Laurent is trying to find his future car. The cheapest vehicle is sold for 2,500 euros, but often takes twice as much for a decent car. Some are in very poor condition. They are between 15 and 20 years old.
I can't buy a new vehicle from Europe directly. I don't have the money. To buy a new vehicle here in Togo, it's a nightmare.
4 to 5 million of these vehicles arrive in Africa every year. That's nearly half of the used cars sold in the world. The problem is that these old vehicles pollute enormously. In Lomé alone, the level of pollution is 5 times higher than what the WHO recommends, largely because of these cars. The government says it has taken action.
We initiated a program to renew the vehicle fleet. There are no customs fees for electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, brand new vehicles.
But in reality, it only concerns a small number of cars. Like here in Senegal, where some vehicles are more than 30 years old, they have become hazards on wheels that cause many accidents. Ousmane Doye was the victim of this a few years ago. Today he is campaigning for the renewal of the vehicle fleet.
There are a lot of disabled people because of accidents caused by old vehicles. They're time bombs. We can't develop our nation by losing our citizens on the road because of old vehicles.
The UN says Africa has the highest road fatality rate in the world, with 246,000 deaths per year.
Well, thank you for watching this edition of Eye on Africa. Stay tuned on France 24 for more international news.